all seem to like my quick guide to classic Who, so naturally people would occasionally ask me to do a guide to the other long-running mainstream sci-fi hit in the UK that's a cult classic elsewhere. So, hello and welcome to my Smegheads guide to Red Dwarf. What's a Smeghead? Well, an insult based on the word smeg, a swear word invented for the show, possibly based on that delightful material that collects under a foreskin. Or an Italian domestic appliance company. There's not that much difference, really. Because actual swearing was much more restricted on TV at the time, made-up swear words were pretty common in British sitcoms. For example, prison-based sitcom Porridge had naff, and Father Ted had feck, both of which have sort of entered general use. Red Dwarf, though, is the king of this. Smeg, Smeghead, Goit, Gimboid, Twonk, and maybe one or two more that I've forgotten. British sitcoms tend to differ from American sitcoms, especially at the time Red Dwarf began. American sitcoms tended towards families or friends, groups that had some sort of underlying affection for each other, while British sitcoms tended towards characters that often disliked each other but were somehow trapped together. The aforementioned Porridge was set in a prison, while Father Ted was three priests stuck on a tiny craggy Irish island. And yes, I'm calling Father Ted a British sitcom. It was made by Irish people for a British company, so as far as I'm concerned, you can either call it Irish or British, and me calling it British just simplified things here. Blackadder Goes Forth was about soldiers trying to escape the Western Front in World War I, and Bottom's about two unemployed psychopaths stuck in crippling poverty together. There's too many to list. The Trapped angle probably equally grew out of British humour tending towards the dark, and because of the extremely limited budgets we're working with. Plus, if you've a cast who hate each other, it's a good idea to give them a reason to stay together. Red Dwarf takes the Trapped idea and magnifies it. Rather than some characters stuck in a building, they're stuck together on a spaceship. Anyway, the later series of Red Dwarf would move away from the pure sitcom and more into a mix of sci-fi action and comedy. Allow me to explain. The first couple of series were mainly a sitcom with sci-fi trappings. It's set in a spaceship, one of the leads is a computer, etc. But in later series, they parody Alien by finding a DNA modifier that turns a curry into a killer monster. Or they'd encounter a legitimately great sci-fi concept like the Inquisitor, a robot who survived to the end of time and built a time machine to visit everyone who ever lived to judge whether they're worthy of life or not. Which of course they're not. And then they mine that concept for laughs. Eventually they went back to the purish sitcom roots, but that's a bunch of videos down the line. Anyway, here's the setup, the mining ship Red Dwarf, which in its original design is one of the great spaceship designs. It's red and squat and literally built out of an asteroid. Beautiful. Pity they ruin it in Series 8. Anyway, the Red Dwarf suffers a catastrophic radiation leak, killing almost all the crew, and the sentient AI Holly decides to take it away from populated regions of space until the radiation returns to safe levels, which takes 3 million years. More than enough time for Holly to go senile. Apart from Holly, the main characters are Dave Lister, played by Craig Charles, who at the time was most famous as an angry punk poet. So if you're familiar with the young ones, he was basically Rick. Rick without the negative traits, i.e. his personality. Dave was in stasis during the disaster and so survived. He's an underachieving slob and was the lowest rank on board. Originally, he was scripted as a 41-year-old who had fried his brain with drugs a la Christopher Lloyd in Taxi or Stand-Up Steve Wright, but that was changed in casting. Lister's casting was odd. Producer Paul Jackson was worried that the character of the cat might be seen as racist, and so he took the script to Craig Charles. He was young, loud, up-and-coming, and seemed to have a beat in this whole racism thing, so he'd know. Yeah, Craig Charles was a middle-aged white English guy's racism detector. Anyway, Charles didn't think it was racist and asked to audition for Lister. Writers Grant and Naylor had only ever seen him doing his angry poetry and weren't happy with the idea because he was nothing like Lister as scripted. Plus he was from Liverpool and they were from Manchester, there's history there. And there's the whole he'd never acted before thing. Anyway, Paul Jackson insisted he get an audition and they liked him enough to admit they were wrong, jettison their concept for the character and embrace the new Scouse Lister. Dave's roommate and arch-nemesis Arnold Rimmer has been reconstructed as a hologram by Holly to keep Dave sane.
John Paul Sartre said, hell was being locked forever in a room with your friends.
Holly, all his mates were French.
Rimmer's an officious, arrogant, stupid and cowardly asshole. He's played by Chris Barry, who was most famous at the time as an impressionist. If you're familiar with Spitting Image, he did some voices there. Barry originally auditioned for Lister and weirdly, Alfred Molina, yes, that one, originally got the role of Rimmer, but he had trouble getting his mind around some parts of the character and so quickly quit, allowing Barry to make the role his own. There's the cat, possibly the last member of a race descended from Lister's pet cat that he snuck on board, which was safely in the hold during the disaster. Over the 3 million years, the cats fed on the ship's impossibly huge amount of supplies and eventually evolved into a humanoid race, the vast majority of whom left the ship on a religious quest before Dave was awakened from stasis. Cat is a cat. He's stupid, vain, and doesn't have a loyal bone in his body, but he looks great and that's all that matters. He's played by Danny John Jules, who was most famous at the time for being a dancer. Apparently Danny John Jules wore his father's zoot suit to his audition and arrived 30 minutes late without realising it. But he was so effortlessly cool about being so late, because he didn't realise that he was late, that he blew the audition out of the water. Holly, who I mentioned earlier, is the ship's computer. He's an IQ of 6,000, but over the 3 million years he's not what he once was. He's monotonous, droll, and not easily moved to panic. He's played by Norman Lovett, who at the time was most famous as a stand-up comic, and originally auditioned for Rimmer. Holly was originally scripted as female, but like Lister's age, this changed in casting. You might have noticed that none of the leads were primarily actors when they started on Red Dwarf, but there were actors in it. Like Mr. Weasley here, and this guy from Aliens. It's just that they were all dead before the end of the first episode.
Wait. Are you trying to tell me everybody's dead?
Should have never let him out in the first place.
Red Dwarf was the brainchild of Rob Grant and Doug Naylor, based on a series of sketches called Dave Holland's Space Cadet, that they did for the Radio 4 show Son of Cliché. It centred on a space traveller marooned in space with a computer called Hab. They completely retooled the idea for TV, and Red Dwarf was eventually born. It took 3 years of rejection and 2 almost crippling strikes before the show was finally picked up. Series 1 aired between the 15th of February and the 21st of March 1988 and had 6 episodes. British sitcoms then, and now, tend towards shorter episode counts to allow the creators, who generally write each episode, greater control, and it's hoped higher and more consistent quality than you get with a whole writer's room. Anyway, Series 1, series being British for season. You see, in the UK, each season is considered a self-contained entity, so each season is a new series, while in the USA, each new season is the same series given extra episodes. It's just a quirk in how episodes are ordered and categorised in each country. So, Series 1, Episode 1, The End. Series 1 starts off with a beautifully slow and ponderous theme, more like 2001 than a sitcom. It's just great. The episode begins with normal, everyday life aboard the mining ship Red Dwarf. Lister and Rimmer are repairing chicken soup machines, a job they're stuck with because the service robots have a better union than them. The officers are officering, including the newly dead George McIntyre, who has been resurrected as a shipboard hologram. Ships like the Red Dwarf are away from populated planets for years at a time, so every crew member has copies of their mind on record, and the highest ranked dead officer becomes the hologram. The ship can only run one at a time.
As you know, Holly's only capable of sustaining one hologram. My advice to anyone more vital to the mission than me is, if you die, I'll kill you.
A hologram as a main character is just one of the things that Red Dwarf did before Star Trek. He's got an H in his forehead, but that's far more subtle than the other possible ways they thought about differentiating holograms from the living. They thought of making holograms transparent, but that would have meant filming them separate from the rest of the cast and probably ruin their comedic timing, or make them black and white, which would have required painting them green for filming so they could do the optical work. Overall, I'm glad they used the H. The crew of the ship is pretty vibrant. There's Captain Hollister, played by Mac McDonald, an American actor who made a career from being cast whenever something filmed in the UK needed an American to be an "I'm done with this ship" type authority figure. Like I mentioned earlier, he was in Aliens. There's Todd Hunter, who's been pierced together from various English sci-fi heroes like Dan Dare. Kachansky, the object of Lister's affection, who's played by Claire Grogan from the rock band Altered Images, and Lister's drinking buddies, one of whom was Arthur Weasley in Harry Potter. This is all to flesh out the world before the disaster and ground everything as much reality as they can. It doesn't last though. Within 20 minutes the pregnant cat Lister snuck on board has been found, thanks to a mix of internal sensors and him being a genius.
But you take a photograph of yourself with the cat and send it to be processed in the ship's lab.
Unregistered animals are illegal on board, so he has a choice. Either give up his cat for extermination or enter stasis for the rest of the mission and forfeit 18 months of pay. When he wakens, everyone's dead, Dave, due to the radiation leak.
And why is it so dirty around here, Hall? What is this stuff?
That is catering officer Olaf Peterson.
I've been eating half the crew.
As I explained earlier, Holly's resurrected Rimmer as the ship's hologram to keep Lister sane. I'm not sure that was the best idea, but 11 series later he's still not gone crazy, so I guess it worked. And Cat's wandering around being a feral stray.
Better make myself look big. Fearsome. I was fearsome.
Basically, almost the whole pilot is used to set up the show. There's no initial adventure or anything like that. It's getting us to the point where the stories can really begin. The Red Dwarf, 3 million years into deep space with a skeleton crew of idiots. With that out of the way, we have our first proper episode, Future Echoes. We open it with a distress call from Holly explaining the setup of the show, in case you missed the pilot. The ship's been accelerating ever since the accident and now it's approaching light speed. As they approach the light barrier, they start seeing future echoes. But what are future echoes?
How simple do you want this?
So Lister can understand it.
Oh dear.
It's difficult, I know.
Essentially, they're catching up with their future and seeing premonitions. Lister cutting himself shaving, Cat breaking his tooth on a robot goldfish, Lister with twins, Rimmer having an argument, and even one of Lister being killed by an explosion.
Brace yourself for a bit of a shock, Lister, but I just saw you die.
What?
I didn't want you to brace yourself.
The premonitions always come true, but I won't spoil little things like how Lister gets twins or what that explosion was about. While this is going on, Lister's making preparations to go back into stasis for the journey back to Earth. Apart from the journey itself, the ship's going so fast it'll take 4,000 years just to turn around. The only problem with the stasis thing, apart from the fact that it would kill the show, Rimmer's against it because he'll be turned off and fears he won't be turned back on again, and Cat will have to leave most of his suits behind. So it never ends up happening. This episode introduces the previously mentioned service robots, the Scudders. Adorable little things that never speak but have vibrant personalities. The little guys react to the possibility of years alone with Rimmer by self-harming en masse. The only guest stars in this episode are the Scudders and some sentient appliances, who in some level only exist to annoy the main cast.
Fly me to the moon and let me...
This is a good example of Season 1 as a whole, sitcom stuff injected with sci-fi concepts. Now, I personally prefer the more adventure-related stuff later on, but if more character-related comedy is your thing, then this will be perfect for you. The character stuff continues with Episode 3, Balance of Power. They never explain exactly why the stasis plan doesn't continue, but I'm guessing they see a future echo that convinces them to give up on it. Either that, or Rimmer somehow sabotages the stasis pods because he's Rimmer and that's the sort of thing he'd do. In this episode, Lister gets tired of taking Rimmer's orders. Rimmer is still technically the superior officer, and to make sure Lister does what he's told, he's hidden the ship's supply of cigarettes and exchanges one for each day's work. Rimmer's also hidden the other hologram tapes, so even if Holly was convinced to replace him as hologram, he can't. Lister's depressed as hell, because he would be, and tries to convince Rimmer to let him go on a date with the hologramic Kachansky, the officer he'd a crush on. When this doesn't work, Lister decides to take an officer exam so he can outrank Rimmer and order him to reveal the location of the cigarettes and the holotapes.
You'll have to salute me, Rimmer. You'll have to call me sir. You'll have to give me Kachansky and me cigarettes.
He takes the easiest exam available, to become a chef. Because of his personality, Cat has a tendency to not get very involved with the story. He kind of does his own thing and accidentally bumps into the main plot. In this one he found the hidden cigarettes and is taught how to use the automatic food dispenser. The only real guest stars in this episode are a depressing flashback to a party before the accident. These flashbacks were originally supposed to be a recurring thing but were very quickly dropped. There's also the usual Scudders and sentient appliances.
Oh, crap. Not you!
I do apologise, I wasn't paying attention. See you later.
We also get Rimmer as Holo Kachansky trying to sabotage Lister's exam. Not really necessary, as Lister is more than capable of sabotaging just about anything himself.
I've seen something you haven't, Squire.
Tony Hawk's made his first of many guest appearances as an appliance. He was the audience comedy fluffer and as such was on hand to cameo whenever needed. Like all of this series, this is good, just slower and less over the top than later ones. Next up is Waiting for God. Something I didn't mention in episode 1 was that the cat race had turned Lister and his cat Frankenstein into religious figures. Lister is Cloister the Stupid, who was frozen in time so the Holy Mother Frankenstein could live. One day he'll return and lead the cats to the promised land, Few Shall, which is Fiji, where Lister hoped to one day move.
I am your god. Okay.
Turn this into a woman.
This episode deals with cat culture, a subject that for some reason they don't usually go into much detail about. Lister started learning to read cat, which in a nice bit of world building is written in smells.
See, Dick, run. Run, Dick, run.
Rimmer's obsessed with an unidentified object that Holly's found near the ship, convinced it's aliens. Spoiler, it's not. Aliens don't exist in Red Dwarf. When they find anything alienish, it's either rogue robots or genetically engineered people/monsters. In this case, it's one of Red Dwarf's garbage pods.
Why didn't you tell him?
Well, it's a laugh, isn't it?
As he can only read at a 3-year-old level, Lister has Holly translate the cat Bible, and it turns out they misunderstood his plans to open a diner in Fiji, and had a holy war over whether the uniform hats were going to be red or blue.
Most of them were killed fighting about that. Staff, really, innit?
You're not kidding? They were supposed to be green.
The rest of the cats left Red Dwarf in 2 ships, searching for Fushal, one using Lister's laundry list as a map and flew straight into an asteroid. The others flew ever onwards, sure that they must be right. The more Lister finds out, the more horrified he is.
I just wish I could meet them and explain and apologise.
Well, that would look spectacular, wouldn't it, Lister? God returns in all his splendour and says, sorry, it's all been a total cock-up.
All usual sitcom fare. Anyway, they left some cats in the bowels of the ship, and the only ones left are the cat and an elderly cat priest. Lister follows the cat into a cargo bay where he finds the priest in his deathbed losing his faith. Lister stages the second coming of Cloister for the priest and lets him die happy as his god tells him what to expect in heaven. The single most interesting part of this episode for me is that under cat theology it is a sin to not be a slob. We all know that cats are extremely clean animals and constantly groom themselves, but according to their religion they have to wear stained clothing. It's even a sin to be cool, forcing cats to act contrary to their nature. I don't know if this was deliberate, but I'm seeing a parallel with real-world religions that treat sexuality as a sin, and making cat roughly equivalent to a loudly gay person who grew up in Saudi Arabia. And check out this little detail, the cat priest's hand is a different colour from his face, because cat's got a multicoloured skin. Oh, that's great. This is probably the best episode so far, not because it's any funnier, but because it strives for more. Lister's hatred for who he was turned into, his sorrow that he didn't have a different laundry list, and how he lies so an old man can die happy. Even the B-plot is about faith, as Rimmer believes the garbage pot is an alien craft that'll bring him back to life. Rimmer and Lister's interactions in this episode are funny, but they're also borderline uncomfortable. Craig Charles and Chris Barry really didn't like each other at this point in the show, and it kinda bleeds through in their performances. Here especially.
Look, I'm sick of hearing about these stupid cats! My concerns are slightly more meaningful than what coloured, stupid, smegging cardboard hat I'm wearing! I'm trying to decipher this!
For guest stars, we have the usual appliances and the cat priest. We never see any other cats in the show, but the door is open for them to pop up. Next up is Confidence and Paranoia, probably the closest thing to the show Red Dwarf would later evolve into. It's a high-concept story. Lister went rummaging through the officers' quarters before they're decontaminated. This leads to freaky future space pneumonia where his thoughts become real.
Why is it raining fish in our sleeping quarters?
The title comes from Lister's sense of confidence and paranoia coming to life and interacting with the crew. Confidence is a spray-tan jackass played by pretty famed Craig Ferguson doing a truly hilarious American accent.
You're my confidence. I just love that accent. It makes me go all wibbly.
While Paranoia is a depressing stick insect of a man played by Lee Corns, one of the greatest "Hey, it's that guy" from late 80s, early 90s British television. So Lister works out a way for Holly to run two holograms at once. I'm not sure exactly how. And he and Confidence find the hidden holotape so they can bring Kachansky back. I don't want to go into detail about what happens with Confidence and Paranoia because of spoilers, but it's explosive. Anyway, the difficulty in how to handle the cat is demonstrated when he refuses to help the passed out Lister. Rimmer can't touch anything, the cat is too self-absorbed to give much of a crap, and Holly doesn't have a body. In-universe the Scudders help out, but this sort of thing necessitated the eventual introduction of Crichton a few years down the line. Anyway, the episode ends with Lister bringing the second hologram online, but Rimmer switched his disc with Kachansky's, so it's a horrifying cliffhanger.
You think you had it bad before, Lister? Now you've got it in stereo, baby.
This was originally going to be the series finale and end with Kachansky back, but they couldn't make a script about Rimmer stealing body parts to build himself a new body work, so they changed the ending and wrote a new finale. Overall, this isn't my favourite episode, but it's far from bad. The season finale is me squared, and it's basically Rimmer discovering how much of an ass he really is. Even he hates Rimmer. The Rimmers move in together and almost immediately try to one-up each other, which eventually turns into petty all-out war, which even stretches to both Rimmers painting and repainting corridors identical shades of grey. While that's going on, Lister finds a recording of Rimmer's death. Even though that part of the episode was recorded at the same time as the pilot to save on paying actors, they managed to get the continuity wrong. Rimmer and the captain are shown standing where each other's remains were later found in the pilot,
And that's Todd Hunter.
No, that's second technician Rimmer.
and then get blown across the bridge because it looked more impressive than keeping continuity.
It's an emergency announcement.
Lister then spends the rest of the episode trying to find out why those were his last words, and I won't spoil it for you, but it's nothing too groundbreaking. But it is based on a real experience writers Grant and Naylor had when meeting TV executives. Anyway, the Rimmer Civil War gets a bit too much for Lister and the cat, so they decide to kill one of them. It's okay though, because he's already dead. This one, like Balance of Power, was all character-based, and it's a really good example of what the first few series of Red Dwarf are all about, using sci-fi as a jumping-off point for character comedy that you couldn't really do any other way. The split-screen work on both Rimmers is spectacular considering the year this was made and the small budget of the show. Chris Barry brings his A-game as the Rimmers, expertly playing off against himself. Cat is essentially a fifth wheel in this episode, searching for a lady cat, shitting in someone's shoes, going to the cinema, or happy to watch Rimmer die. Whatever the scene needs, really. Me squared, like the rest of Series 1, is reasonably strong, just not spectacularly so. It's hard to find unique things to say about it that's not covered by other episodes because Series 1 is so consistent. Series 1 is funny and has no real clunkers. If I had to choose a best episode, I'd probably choose Waiting for God because it added serious world building and was thought-provoking. But for worst, I'm sorry, I can't decide. Series 1 is just good, and a great place to start with Red Dwarf. But then again, it would be. It's the start.
You can't whack death on the head. If he comes near me, I'm going to rip his nipples off.